What's the difference between visual novels, dating sims, and adventure games? If you asked 10 people on the street, you would get 10 different answers, plus a lot of weird looks. Lines have been blurred, games have been miscategorized, and some people have become very confused. That's why today I'm going to personally end the confusion once and for all by outlining the differences between each genre. Hopefully, by the end of this video, you'll be able to separate your Dream Daddies from your Clannads and Zero Escapes. Let's get started. An adventure game is a type of game in which the player advances through a story by exploring areas and solving puzzles. Sounds simple enough. Don't get ahead of yourself, adventure games have evolved a lot over time. Computers came with keyboards at the time, but they wouldn't be able to use mice until many years later. Instead, we had things like 1972's Hunt the Wumbus, text-based adventure games that had a strange fascination with caves. These early games were just words on a screen, and you had to type in commands to complete actions. Riveting. As technology advanced and computers became more powerful, text adventures gave way to games with rudimentary graphics. The first of these graphic adventure games to be released was Mystery House, a game developed by a company now known as Sierra Entertainment in 1980. Mystery House was still essentially a text adventure, but it added vector graphics that provided a visual aid to the story that was being told by that text. From the first point-and-click adventure game, 1984's Enchanted Scepters, the genre blew up. People loved the ability to directly interact with their games, and further advancements in technology allowed for impressive, colorful environments, sprites, and even animation. Things had really come a long way since the 70s, and point-and-click adventure games carried the video game industry for the next decade or so, spurred on by games like Myst and the legendary releases from LucasArts. Here are a few games from this era that you might recognize. Maniac Mansion, The Secret of Monkey Island, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, Sam & Max, Full Throttle, and Grim Fandango. Despite all of their success, some mismanagement at LucasArts caused the studio to stop making the point-and-click adventure games that built them up, and many of the people who worked on them left the studio. Thankfully though, adventure games didn't just die after that. The people who left LucasArts included Kevin Bruner, Dan Connors, and Troy Molander, who founded Telltale Games, and Tim Schafer, who founded Double Fine Studios. Double Fine went on to make Broken Age after a wildly successful Kickstarter campaign. And they have also remastered some classic adventure games like Day of the Tentacle, Grim Fandango, and Full Throttle. However, Telltale arguably took the adventure game genre and brought it into the modern age. They've had a few rocky years, and not all is well within their doors, but with games like The Walking Dead, The Wolf Among Us, and Batman: The Enemy Within, all delivering incredible, memorable stories and experiences, I would say they've contributed to the history of adventure games as a whole. Now let's move on to something more romantic. But first, we have something really special to share with you that set us up for this next part. Today's episode is brought to you by friends of the channel, the Occult Triangle Lab, and their game Black Heaven, a necromantic dating sim. A new dark fantasy horror experience available now on Steam. In Black Heaven, you collect the ghosts of your former friends and relive the romantic memories of your past. However, as your past and present become blurred, your grip on sanity begins to slip. Black Heaven features a fractal madness mechanic that changes the narrative and soundtrack to warped, nightmarish versions if the player attempts to repeatedly undo their decisions by reloading the game. No matter what you do, the game remembers your past. Black Heaven also features in-depth world building, beautifully rendered backgrounds, multiple endings, and 4 romance paths, including 1 secret route. If you're looking for a horror-themed dating sim, check out Black Heaven on Steam now. So a dating sim is a style of simulator game originating in Japan that fools you into thinking people love you. Just kidding, but also not really. I'm very lonely. Dating sims tend to feature a male protagonist who you play from a first-person perspective. Players manage their time by participating in activities that increase a set of stats or interacting with any number of female characters while exploring an open world. I want to emphasize the quotations on the open part, since I don't really have fingers to show that off. Gameplay usually consists of filling love meters by building relationships with these girls through conversations with branching dialogue trees. The choices you make would either endear the characters to you or put them off. and characters respond differently based on their personalities. There's also a day and night cycle or time mechanic that requires you to plan out who you spend time with to maximize the chances of your desired outcome. You know, like which lady you want to hold hands with. While the majority of dating sims focus on male-female relationship dynamics, there are also female-female and male-male dating sims called Girls Love and Boys Love games, respectively. Everyone deserves to be fooled into thinking people love them. The genre of dating sims has a pretty interesting history. The first games to be associated with this genre are 1985's Girls Garden and 1987's Nakayama Miho no Tokimeki High School. As you can tell, I am not Japanese, so sorry if I really butcher those pronunciations. Girls Garden plays more like an action game where the goal is to win over a cute boy, but here's a crazy fact. Girls Garden was the first game Yuki Naka made for Sega. And in case you don't already recognize that name, that's the Sonic guy. Similarly, Nakayama Miho no My Hero Academia was designed by Hironobu Sakaguchi and Yoshio Sakamoto, who created Final Fantasy and Metroid, respectively. This one was presented more in line with the text-based adventure game of the time, but the goal of winning over pop idol Miho Nakayama by matching dialogue choices with facial expressions make it an ancestor of dating sims. The first game of its type to nail down some staple dating sim mechanics was Dokusai from 1992. The game is categorized as a visual novel, but established the time, conversation, and completion mechanics that would define future dating sims. Again, with the quotation marks on completion, because I can't air quotes. Konami's Tokimeki Memorial from 1994 is another pillar of dating sim history, and it features a pretty interesting mechanic. If you ignore or don't spend time with any of the 12 girls in the game, they would spread rumors behind the player's back, reducing the love meters of the characters you did decide to talk to. It also allowed players to create any number of identities based on the stats they decided to focus on or ignore, as well as their dialogue decisions. Tokimeki Memorial was widely popular in its time and still holds up today. Dating sims began to gain popularity throughout the rest of the 90s and into the 2000s, but not quite in the form they had taken on previously. A few cross-genre games series came along that incorporate dating sim elements, along with RPG and combat mechanics, the most notable of which is the Persona series. Persona has obviously gone on to become an incredibly successful franchise since its first appearance in 2006, but Japanese and anime-style dating sims have kind of taken a back seat in recent years. The genre has expanded to include popular Western dating sims that blow up the Steam charts like Dream Daddy, Monster Prom, and Boyfriend Dungeon. And I guess there is also I Love You Colonel Sanders, a finger-licking good dating simulator, which is not only nightmarishly strange, but also probably the longest title in the history of gaming. If you have a better one, put it in the comments for me. I want to read it. You might have noticed that games like Dream Daddy and other dating sims look and play strikingly similar to titles categorized as visual novels. And you're probably wondering, so hey Kino, what makes a dating sim different from a visual novel? And why are you so cute? Well, I don't have an answer for your second question, but I do have one for the first. So then, what is a visual novel? Visual novels are games that focus primarily on telling a story, usually in first person, through a combination of text, art, and sound design. Those stories also tend to be non-linear and feature branching narrative paths along with multiple endings. And they also feature little to no gameplay. They didn't start off like this, and a lot of games you think are visual novels now might not actually be. Like all things the weebs love, visual novels originated in Japan. The earliest instance of visual novel style mechanics is the Portopia serial murder case. Yuji Horii 1983 murder mystery game was inspired by the American adventure games of the time, most notably Mystery House. If you've been paying attention, you'll remember this one. This meant that although it did establish certain visual novel staples like branching dialogue paths, different endings, and a first-person perspective, it also had extensive gameplay in the form of open-world exploration, text command-based interaction, and item-based puzzles. All of the mechanics that were present throughout the evolution of adventure games. Portopia was created to introduce Japanese audiences to American adventure games, but Yuji Horii couldn't have known that the style of game he created would go on to influence Western games in turn. After Portopia, a few other Japanese adventure games in a similar style emerged, like Crystal Dragon, and Hideo Kojima's Snatcher, which was basically Blade Runner and Invasion of the Body Snatchers fused together. You can't fool me, Kojima. I see past you. I understand your... No, I don't understand how you do this stuff. As we move into the 90s, these Japanese adventure games began to branch off into different paths and evolve into something a little more familiar. Whereas previous games had branching narratives but focused on puzzles and other types of gameplay, new franchises like System Seicom's Novelware and Chunsoft's Sound Novel games moved more towards a straight narrative experience, with visuals and sounds that accompanied them. Novelware appeared first with 1989's Dome, and Sound Novel came along a few years later with 1992's Odogariso. Despite a few minor differences, these games were basically straight-up choose-your-own-adventure books in a video game form. The most important thing these franchises did was ditch the adventure game puzzles and mechanics of the Portopia serial murder case and Snatcher in order of straight narrative experiences. Unfortunately, I do have to gloss over one part. The actual term visual novel was coined by a development studio called Leaf for a game called Shizuku, which is not something we're going to talk about for this family-friendly channel. Moving on. This is where things start to get a little blurry. In Japan, these games received clear distinctions. The more gameplay-focused titles remained adventure games, often abbreviated to ADV or AVG, while visual novels, or VNs, served exclusively to tell a story with little, if any, gameplay at all. However, when these two different types of games began to make their way to the West, they kind of all got lopped into the same category. For instance, both the Zero Escape games and Clannad are classified as visual novels on Steam. Both are narrative-focused for sure, but the extra layers of gameplay in Zero Escape make it a Japanese adventure game rather than a visual novel. Then there are games that are not as easy to categorize. For instance, it's arguable that the Phoenix Wright games are visual novels. But then again, there is the level of freedom the player has when conducting investigations, which is reminiscent of Portopia. The expansion of visual novels to the West and the subsequent confusion can be traced back to 2008's Fate Stay Night. It is arguably considered to be the first visual novel that made it big here, and that was a game that had all the hallmarks of a visual novel while adding, let's say, a few extra things that make categorization a difficult task. You see, the original version of Fate Stay Night was an adults-only game due to a handful of scenes that we are not going to show here. However, a censored version targeted at a younger audience was released for the PS2 in 2007. That version retained the affection meter and relationship-based gameplay, so you could still enjoy the story the game had to tell without worrying about people walking in on you during an awkward moment. One of the things that set Fate apart was how much the story deviates based on your choices. We're not talking alternate ending, we're talking pretty much three very different stories. There's the Stay Night path, Unlimited Blade Works, and Heaven's Feel. This meant that the first visual novel Westerners experienced had extra layers of gameplay that wouldn't be associated with its category in Japan. Then, when Fate exploded into a massive media property that encompassed manga, anime, and movies, everybody wanted to get in on the visual novel action of the West. Honestly, without Fate Stay Night, we likely would never have gotten other popular visual novels in the same vein. Games like Steins Gate, Danganronpa, and others all trace their popularity back to the Fate franchise. But if you look on Steam, those games are sitting right next to Phoenix Wright in the visual novel category. I think this is probably where a lot of confusion stems from. So let's put together everything we've learned. Adventure games were invented way back in the 70s and established mechanics like conveying a story through text on a computer, which evolved to feature increasingly impressive graphics, and then finally gained point-and-click mechanics once computer mice became widely available around 1984. Then, those adventure games inspired Yuji Horii to make the first Japanese adventure game, which in turn inspired other creators to create similar games that branched off to create a subgenre of games that were focused on telling a story without puzzles or extensive gameplay called visual novels. And then, visual novels like Fate Stay Night began to introduce romance and relationship mechanics that spawned the dating sim genre. The mechanics of dating sims began to be incorporated into games other than visual novels soon after, which caused their popularity to grow so much that they inspired Western creators to make their own dating sims in a number of different styles. You probably didn't think that this video would become an examination of the cyclical nature of inspiration and how it has affected the video game industry, but here we are. Western adventure games inspired Japanese adventure games, which then evolved into the resulting dating sims inspiring Western dating sims. Pretty wild. Thanks for watching, and tell me your favorite visual novels or dating sims down in the comments. And leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And if you'd like to appear at the end of our videos like these awesome friends, you can join our Patreon at the link in the description.